back in 1913 when they launched Parcel Post, and that just means you can send packages through the mail, there weren't really any rules about what you couldn't send. It was just too new.
For the first time, people could send things through the mail that were weighed more than 4 pounds.
That's Nancy Pope, a curator at the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum.
And people took advantage of this to send pretty much everything they could find.
One newspaper sent a competing newspaper eggs.
And then the second newspaper returned by sending a cake baked with those eggs.
Parcel Post was a huge success. People mailed 300 million packages in the first 6 months. In comparison, the post office now delivers 500 million pieces of mail a day. While it was good fun for some people, for others, like farmers or these brand new mail order catalogs, it was an invaluable way to do business. And, as is human nature, some folks got a little carried away.
And one of those were the parents of May Piersdorf, who was a young girl who weighed 50 pounds, which was quite important because 50 pounds was the limit for parcel post service. The parents could not afford to send her to visit her grandparents by train, but they could afford to send her by parcel post. So they got enough stamps to equal 50 pounds worth of weight. They attached the stamps to her sleeve.
May's uncle was a railway mail clerk, so when a train came in, they just put her aboard her uncle's mail car.
And she rode in the train car to the town to visit her grandparents. And this made the news, and it got a lot of other people thinking about the same sort of thing. And before you knew it, there were little babies and little children being sent in the mail, as it were, across the U.S.
Yep, that's right. People were handing off their pride and joys to the post office. Less than a month into the start of Parcel Post in 1913, the Postmaster General wrote the New York Times, saying that he'd received questions on how exactly one would wrap a baby so that it would comply with shipping regulations.
When these stories were popping up in the news, some of them, quite honest and real, some of them, no doubt, fictionalized, but all playing on the idea that the Post Office Department was the answer to this question of, how can one child or one baby be passed from family member to family member inexpensively? Pretty
easily, it turns out. In mid-January 1914, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Bugh of Glen Est, Ohio, was carried by rural free delivery for about a mile to his grandmother, Mrs. Lois Bugh. His folks paid 15 cents and, very nurturingly, insured him for $50. A couple of weeks later, the Savis family of Pine Hollow, Pennsylvania, sent their daughter to relatives in Clay Hollow using 45 cents worth of stamps.
That's what most of these little kids were and these babies. It was instances of visiting family members who were not that far away. In some cases, they were on the same rural route.
And that's why mailing kids wasn't as big of a risk as you might think. Back then, most Americans lived in rural areas. The mail carriers on the routes were men that they knew well, and people could trust them to tote their little ones between towns as an affordable way to travel. At least one family used Parcel Post for a seriously long trip. In 1915, 6-year-old Edna Neff, who just squeaked in under the 50-pound limit, was mailed by Parcel Post from her mother in Pensacola, Florida, to her dad's house in Christiansburg, Virginia. Grand total? 15 cents.
It was not illegal to do it because the Postmaster General and the lawmakers never thought that was going to be an issue.
In 1920, Congress put an official end to everyone's fun. They passed a law that made it a federal crime to mail humans, regardless of weight.